Poke the Bear is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 152, presented by FanDuel. I am Conor Ryan, and I don't know if you guys noticed, flying solo today. Our esteemed colleague, Evan Marinofsky, is down the Cape for the week, gallivanting around, probably getting an ice cream sundae, getting a frap at Sunday school. You know, he's probably at the beach coma, having a few Coronas, as one does around this time of year. So it's a one-man show today, and you stuck with me. So thankfully, much to I'm sure Evan's relief, the Bruins aren't doing a whole lot right now. Again, we're in the buyout window. The Bruins have had a chance now to create some cap space by maybe buying out a guy like Mike Reilly or Derek Forbort. Nothing happened yet. Again, this episode will drop on Friday, so if anything changes, please don't yell at me. But right now, not much to report. Still in the waiting zone here as we get ready for, I think, the week ahead when things should really start ramping up. When you're looking at the draft, you're looking at the start of free agency next weekend. Things are going to, I think, start getting hectic pretty soon. So as we brace for a pretty busy couple of weeks here in the offseason, I figure what better time than to do a nice mailbag episode, right? So thankfully, we reached out to a few people on Twitter, asked for a few questions. So we'll go through a couple of them right now and kind of just assess the state of the Bruins and what some of the questions that our loyal listeners have been asking about. So I think we should probably just get started off now by looking at one question from Twitter. Jamie Nichols at Jamie in Boston says, do they keep any of the players they traded for last season? That remains to be seen, but I think when you look at it, right, between Dmitry Orlov, Tyler Bertuzzi, Garnet Hathaway, I think the one that you can probably eliminate right from the start is actually Dmitry Orlov. And again, this is a guy that the Bruins, gave up some pretty solid assets for him, for a guy that I think could really round out their decor, a guy that could really complement an already very strong roster they had. And even though you look in the playoffs against the Panthers, he had a few up and down games where maybe a little bit too much risk reward for probably what the Bruins were hoping for. You look at the offensive generation he was able to create from the blue line. You saw spurts of that physicality. This is a guy that is going to get a very nice payday this offseason. It's probably the last big payday of his career at his age. And I think when you look at the Bruins, let's be realistic now. You've got less than $5 million in cap space as of right now. The NHL pretty much announced that the salary cap's only going up $1 million. So you're already going to be up against it. You got to be very, very selective if you're the Bruins with who you're going to be targeting this offseason in terms of either signing a free agency, who you're retaining, what have you. Even if the Bruins had an extra, $4 or $5 million in cap space, I just don't see how they have the resources available to re-sign a guy like Orlov in terms of how he fits in. And I think you look at the short term, yes, of course we'd love Orlov in terms of what he brings. You, again, had the luxury of, even though they kind of strayed away from it a little bit, of having a guy like McAvoy, Lindholm, and Orlov each kind of anchor their own pair. Like, that is a luxury that very, very few teams have. And it's why the Bruins kind of went all in last year to acquire him from the Capitals. But I think when you're the Bruins and you're faced in this situation of trying to, find who to retain here and what players are kind of viewed as a luxury with what limited fiscal resources you have, I just don't see Orlov being a realistic option there. And I think even if you look at it, right, the Bruins right now, obviously, you're still waiting to find out about Bergeron and Krejci and kind of what the next steps there are there. But this is still a team that when you look at, you have Pastrnak sign long-term, you have McAvoy, Zacha, you have, the foundation for this next generation of Bruins talent is there. And it's what the Bruins are trying to build. Yes, they're trying to compete now. Obviously, they went all in, but I think it's something that Evan and I both hopped on quite a bit is this is still a team that should be pretty competitive both next year and especially the years after that, if they can, keep that fiscal flexibility. I mean, you look at next year, yes, this summer is going to be very difficult in terms of, really doing a spending spree or really augmenting the roster unless you want to move a lot of proven assets off this team. But You look at next year; they're projected to have 29 million in cap space next season, and it's not accounting for how much the cap could jump up. Like once that escrow is paid off by the players, you could have 5-6 million in addition for next year, and then another 4 or 5 million year after that. You could have a $10 million jump in the salary cap ceiling by 25-26. And if you're the Bruins and you've already have guys like McAvoy and Lindholm and Zacha and a few of these other players locked up long term, you ideally have Jeremy Swayman signed this year as well. All of a sudden, you have a pretty good core in place, and then you have a lot of cap room where you can really bolster that team. So whether that's going out and signing a top six center that's probably costing you $9 million plus in the years ahead, you do have a kind of a reset or ability to really augment your roster and add to this team next summer. So I think you look at the Bruins and signing a guy like Orlov. The one thing the Bruins don't want to have, and they don't really have right now, is albatross contracts, right? Like maybe Reilly's in that mix, maybe Taylor Hall, he shouldn't be making $6 million, what have you. But there's not any contracts where like they need to get, they've got what 3-4 more years in terms of a guy that's getting paid 2-3 million over what they should be. Like they don't really have that, which thank God, because if not, they would already be really up the creek. But I think you look at where Orlov is with his age, his size, the way he plays. That's a guy that even if you were able to scrap together the 6.5, 7 million to keep him year to year, don't really like being the team responsible for that kind of contract. So I think they're moving on there. Hathaway, again, I think some people view him as being a little bit underwhelming during his short stint here. I still think he has value. He's a guy that can rack up a lot of hits, is good for 10 goals, 15 to 20 points a year. It's just, again, I view that as a luxury the Bruins probably can't afford to have right now, right? Like I think if you're the Bruins and you're looking at the fourth line, you're probably looking at, that's where the youth movement is, right? And Evan and I talked about that. I think the name of the game for the Bruins in terms of changing their forward core is injecting more speed. So I think if you look at next year, if your fourth line is guys like Johnny Beecher or Jakob Lauko, or these guys that are on cheap deals, are hungry to earn more minutes, can really impact the game with their speed. I think that's kind of your way to bring those guys in. So I think Hathaway is still a very good pro, and I think he's going to be coveted by a lot of teams. And I'm sure the Bruins love to have him back. But I think when you look at where the Bruins kind of need to cut corners here, re-signing a guy like Hathaway when you got younger, hungry players in place, I think that's the route they take. And then the big one's Hathaway, which I think is a guy they want to retain, but it's going to be easier said than done. I think even if you, move guys like Forbort or Reilly or Grizzly or what have you, that's kind of the first guys we mentioned there. You're still probably going to have to move what? Is it Omark? Is it Taylor Hall? Is it someone like that? Like you're moving a key piece, I think, off this roster to retain Bertuzzi. And it's a tough one. I think it's just going to come down to what his price is going to be. If, we get to July 1st and all of a sudden it's announced that he, signs with the Red Wings again, or he goes to the Avalanche or something, and it's for $7 million. I think the Bruins and Bruins fans are like, all right, tip your cap, can't match that. If you go somewhere and it's 5.25 or 5.5 million a year, then you're like, all right, that's painful because you probably could create kind of that cap space to retain him. And I think he's a guy that, yes, we can look at the warts in his game defensively, what have you. I think you look at what kind of dynamic he brought to this team last year, especially at the net front. I think he's kind of the way the NHL and the game is evolving. It's guys like Bertuzzi at the net front who can make the biggest impact in terms of not afraid to get into the blue paint, screen goalies, kind of wreak havoc, but also has the skill to, how many times do we see him get the puck and in a half second he dishes it to David Pastrnak or what have you. I think if you're building that next core, having a guy that already has really good chemistry with David Pastrnak, who is and will be the focal point of your offense for the next almost a decade, maybe it's good to surround him with players like that. So I think the Bruins are going to make a very concerted effort to get Bertuzzi back here, but you have to make quite a few other moves to make that work, to make it happen. So it's going to be easier said than done, but I think it's just going to come down to what his payout's going to be. 5.25, 5.5. I think the Bruins are in position there to try to retain him. But if we're talking about 6.5, 7, I just don't see it happening. So it remains to be seen kind of what happens there, but I view Bertuzzi as the guy that they really want to target to keep him here long term. All right, let's go to another one from Chris Green at Greeny CJ, who says, how worried should we be about Jeremy Swayman getting offer sheeted? Buffalo seems like an obvious landing spot, position of need, and hurts a division rival. Very true. And it is something that, man, it's something we always talk about every offseason with offer sheets, and how I think everyone, the media, fans, it's such a great concept in terms of adding extra drama and intrigue to an offseason where honestly you see a few trades here and there. A lot of stuff happens on the first day of free agency, and that's kind of that. You have the lead up to free agency a couple of years where there's guys who might be hitting free agency and all of a sudden they re-sign with their team, or it's like when Stamkos almost went to market and everyone's like, oh, who's going to get him? And he's back with Tampa Bay. Like, there's always a lot of intrigue with the NHL offseason, but not a lot of actual stuff that happens. It's very different from, I don't know, let's say the NBA, where Brad Stevens is trading Marcus Smart at 11:58 p.m. or what have you. So it is something that you wish GMs would use a lot more in terms of offer sheets, in terms of really putting teams that are in a precarious spot, what the next move is going to be there. That being said, it's like, all right, we want more of those, but if you're a Bruins fan, you probably don't want that to be the case, because I think when you look at Jeremy Swayman and how much teams probably covet him, it's a prime situation where a team like Buffalo could really put the Bruins in a brutal spot, because they can offer, it's not like other offer sheets you hear where it's like, all right, we can give this guy $7-8 million a year, and teams really have to weigh the options in terms of letting that guy go to get, 1 or 2 first round picks or what have you. Like, that's the point where I'm sure maybe some Bruins fans are like, we'll take the 2 first rounders if that's the case, considering how depleted our farm system is. But if you're the Sabres and you're giving him $4 million, $4.5 million, then you're kind of stuck in a tough spot if you're the Bruins, where you probably have to match that. You don't want him to go to a rival, especially a team that's on the up and up. But we'll see what happens there. I have to imagine Buffalo, even though it would be great to really put the Bruins in a tough spot with how much limited cap space they have, that's still a team that has a guy like Devin Levi, who's had a great career over at Northeastern, can really make a big impact for that team. And that's a team that I also view as being, built for the future. They already made really good strides this past year with guys like Darlene and Owen Power and obviously Tage Thompson. I feel like now that they can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of what they've been building there, and adding a guy like Levi and what he can bring. They're probably not a team that's going to be in that mix, but listen, when you have a guy like Jeremy Swayman who's out there in the Bruins, who are so limited with what they can do with their cap space, would not be surprised if a few GMs are very interested in doing that to the Bruins. But again, it's something we always talk about, and very rarely does it happen as much as we want it to. So I'm still pretty skeptical about that. But the Bruins already have their own issues in terms of just what they're going to do with that goaltender position, because I don't know, between signing Swayman to what could be a bridge deal, and you're looking at $3 million, $3.5 million, or what have you, unless you somehow convince Swayman to take a really cheap 1-year deal as kind of the bridge to get through this really cap crunch year, feels like something has to give there with that goaltending position, because I just can't see the Bruins committing $9 million in total to that position, especially when you look at how much variance there is at the goaltending spot. Look at Aiden Hill, the third string goalie who just led Vegas to a Stanley Cup. So a lot of really tough decisions there. And it's one that I feel like most Bruins fans aren't going to be happy either way in terms of how they target it, right? Like, if you are moving Ullmark, unless it's a fantastic return, it's still going to be something where you're going to be second guessing until we see how the season kind of plays out. So, but I do think in terms of an offer sheet, I think the Bruins' number one priority is making sure they don't lose a guy like Swayman, who I think they have full confidence in terms of being that goalie for the future.
Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet for up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/Boston to join today. And frankly, that's the best part of FanDuel. You can bet on anything. You want to wager on the odds of how many dingers Rafael Devers will have this year? Be my guest. Maybe the Bruins over-under for wins next season. Go for it. So bet now on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And of course, an app where you can get paid instantly. Don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet for up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to fanduel.com/Boston to sign up. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission.
All right, next question is from Joe Todd at Hey Joe Todd. I'm also very thankful that most of these questions we received on Twitter are from like normal Twitter names, not anything heinous that I have to avoid saying here. So shout out to Chris, Jamie, Joe, all you guys for making sure we keep this a strictly PG rated podcast. So Joe's question is, not including the possible buyout candidates, Mike Reilly, Derek Forbort, Mitch Miller, what's your move to get some cap space back? Again, I think you're looking at the same usual suspects there, Joe, in terms of on defense. I think Matt Grzelcyk's still a pretty appealing player that, again, I don't think you're getting this sweeping return from him, but I think he's a guy, when you look at his skill set, there's plenty of teams that can get guys like Derek Forbort who can, get a lot of D-zone starts, block shots, get on the PK. As much as I think some Bruins fans are soured on Grzelcyk's game, his skill set is something that I think is coveted in today's NHL in terms of puck movement, transition, killing plays, with his stick. There's value there in terms of what he brings. So unlike a guy like Forbort or Reilly, who might be easier said than done in terms of looping them in a trade and just getting a contract off the books, Bruins shouldn't have any issue there in terms of if you want to get Grzelcyk for a third-round pick, second-round pick, what have you, part of a larger package, there'll be offers out there. I don't think that's the issue. It's just, I think, for the Bruins, whether or not you want to move Grzelcyk. And again, you look at how he was used in the playoffs, it makes you think that maybe the Bruins don't value him as much. But still, I think when you look at, one, how many the limited options you have in terms of really changing around this decor. You can't go out and just spend to get other players that fit in. You look at Grzelcyk and his versatility, whether he can play on the left side, right side, he can play up with McAvoy, which we know that pair is going to be good when they're both out there together, but he can also move down to the third pair if need be. He is still a pretty valuable asset in terms of just, being a spare piece that you can kind of put up and down the lineup there. So it's going to come down to whether or not the Bruins view it as, if that playoff run and how he was used, which is just a sign of things to come with how Jim Montgomery wants to use them. So he's a definite candidate there. Ullmark, again, we've talked about it time and time again, but you look at where his value is, probably will never be higher than this year, coming off of a most likely Vezina Trophy win. And again, the goalie market can be very odd in terms of what you get in terms of a trade, and as we said, the variance of that spot. But he's still a guy that if you're looking to shed, $5 million, you roll with Jeremy Swayman, and whether it's getting a veteran journeyman, you look at guys down in Providence. You have pieces in place there that can really make a difference and can slot in. And again, you're not going to have the same tandem of Swayman and Ullmark and, this grouping that you relied on to win 65 games. And maybe that's just the price of doing business, right? And in terms of just the financial situation you're dealing with right now. In a perfect world, of course, I'd love to keep those two together. But if moving Ullmark allows you to retain a guy like Bertuzzi, allows you to add another piece on defense or up front somewhere else, and you have the faith in Jeremy Swayman and whoever the backup is to still carry that load and be the last line of what should still be a pretty structured defense with guys like McAvoy and Lindholm in place, has to be a viable option. And then, again, I don't view, situation where you're moving guys like Marchand or anything like that. But in terms of a forward core, if you're looking for the most expendable player, it probably still has to be Taylor Hall. I think he's still very good in his role, was kind of a guy that sacrificed some of his own play to be a third line defense first kind of player there last year, but in the playoffs still really elevated his game. If you don't have Bertuzzi and he signs somewhere else, and your contingency plan next year is maybe a second line of Hall, Zacha, David Pastrnak, still going to do a lot of damage. Would not be surprised if that line plays together all year and Hall's up to his usual capabilities. Could go right back to a 60-point season. I think he just has that skill set, even though he is getting a little bit older. But if it's between him and Bertuzzi and one has to go, I think he is still a guy, Taylor Hall, that could be on the move there. So those are the most likely candidates. And then we can get into, again, Bruins are looking at more of like a hockey trade or where you're moving proven assets to get a player back. You can look at a guy like DeBrusk, where maybe the Bruins don't want to be the team that pays him his next big contract next year, especially if let's say he scores 30 goals this year finally and breaks through on that scoring threshold. He could be a guy the Bruins maybe aren't comfortable with giving $6.5, $7 million next year. So he could also be a guy, but still, when I think you look at his cost and what he can still bring this team next year, where you're still trying to compete and contend, I think that still is a bit of a long shot unless you're getting a proven piece back. I don't think it's like a 1-for-1 swap, but if you're looking at DeBrusk or DeBrusk and Carlo or DeBrusk and one of your top prospects, what have you, then you can maybe get a return back that can give you something. Whether it's, again, we can look at Pierre-Luc Dubois or Elias Lindholm or something like that. Like, there's other options out there that the Bruins might target even if it is giving up a potential 30-goal scorer in Jake DeBrusk. All right, let's see. Let's wrap up a few here. We got one question from Dylan Patemry, who says, Dylan asks, if Patrice Bergeron doesn't return, do the Bruins make a move for a 1C or try out Coyle and Zacha as their top centers? Yeah, I mean, that is, until we find out whether or not Bergeron and Krejci are coming back, that's going to set the table for the entire offseason. Again, I think we've talked about it before on this podcast. Hunch right now, if you had to ask me, is Krejci's gone. I think he's going down to South Carolina. He's relaxing, back for 1 year. Did his best to kind of put this team over the top, retires the great Bruin. I think Patrice Bergeron is still back for 1 more year. I think when you look at the fact that he's still playing at a high level, the fact that you kind of need a center that can probably take a very, very cheap deal just to get you under this kind of cap crunch for this upcoming season. Patrice Bergeron, again, it's something that it's unfair to keep relying on this guy to keep on bailing you out every year, but I also don't see a situation where Bergeron, who is so, I think, conscious of his role in this organization, leaving it in a good spot. Him, even though he is going to be 38 and, the amount of wear and tear he has, I can't see him, even though he gave it his all this year, a season that unfortunately ended in such a crushing fashion. I can't see him then being like, all right, well, team can't sign any top 6 centers this upcoming year, and they still got a good core, but they're kind of up the creek in terms of what they have down the middle. Peace. I just can't see that being the case for Bergeron. So I do expect him to be back. And if you have Bergeron and Zacha, not bad in terms of, rolling it back for 1 more year and then kind of weighing your options in terms of next summer, when all of a sudden you do have a lot more cap space and you can try to sign a player or trade for someone else. Like, you have more options next year. So Bergeron would really do them a solid if he did come back, to put it lightly. But if not, then then it gets difficult, right? Because, again, I think the Bruins, when you talk to like their management, I think they were very impressed with what they had there in those road games down in Florida when it was Coyle and Zacha. I mean, they both played fantastic in terms of those roles. It's just, can those guys, especially maybe Coyle, do that in short stretches and really impress? I think absolutely. I don't think there's anyone who can look at those road games and, view a guy like Coyle or Zacha as being weak links in those roles. It's just, can they do that consistently over a 82 game plus 15, 20, 25 playoff games? That's a little bit tougher, right? In terms of just relying on those guys. You don't really have the options in place to turn to if they do kind of hit a rut there. So it's all going to, again, come down to just what the costs are, though, right? Like, if you're trying to get a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois, one, you have to give up a lot of assets for him. Like, it's not like I think you can just trade Linus Ullmark out there if he even has I have to imagine Winnipeg probably isn't high on Ullmark's list of potential trade destinations. So beyond finding the right package to get that guy like Dubois, you also have to sign him. And if, you listen to these reports that he wants $9 million a year, I don't know if you really have the cap room to do that without, again, moving significant pieces out in any trade, whether that's to Winnipeg, moving other assets out and getting just draft capital back, what have you. Very, very complicated this year, especially in terms of, not only acquiring a guy, but signing him long-term. That's the biggest issue. So again, you look at in the years ahead, when you do have more cap room, whether it's you then have the fiscal flexibility to sign a guy like Elias Lindholm, who knows, in another year or two when you have more younger prospects come up that could be appealing trade chips, is Clayton Keller going to be with the Arizona Coyotes in the coming years, right? I think like the Bruins' overall mindset, when you have this pretty solid core in place, but obviously a lot of question marks down the middle, it's keep building a strong core, stay competitive, and then keep on trying to find ways to, add those sought after centers, whether that's, again, in free agency next year, trades. You're hoping that maybe a guy like Matthew Poitras or another prospect steps up in the coming years. I think you have a pretty good roster in place. It's just going to be continually kicking that problem down the road. Hopefully it solves itself, right? It's almost like the Bruins for a couple of years couldn't find that perfect second line winger to add to a guy like David Krejci's line. And it's just, continually searching for it. You finally got it a few years ago with Taylor Hall. You had Bertuzzi this year. You eventually find it. It's all about just kind of having those things line up. You're looking for another legitimate top four guy to pair with McAvoy in that defense. You finally find it in Lindholm, even though it takes a couple years to find it. So I think that's kind of how they view the center position. So you ideally have Bergeron and Zacha there this year, or Bergeron and Krejci. Again, if Krejci wants to come back, the Bruins will absolutely take that. But I think the biggest, domino that's going to kind of set the tone for the entire offseason is whether or not Bergeron comes back, because with their cap situation, you desperately need that guy back for, again, a very, very cheap deal, which, again, asking a whole lot out of a future Hall of Famer there, a guy that still has given pretty much everything to this organization. But such is the kind of the hand the Bruins are dealt now with how their cap situation is. So I think that's going to be something worth following. And I guess to end this one, let's go a little off script here. St. Mike 35, to round out our questions, asks, one Dunkin' coffee flavor for the rest of your life. What is it? Well, Mike, again, the most important thing, of course, is we're not talking about any hot coffee. We're not doing Coolada, anything like that. We're doing classic iced. And it's a conundrum, I got to tell you. If we're talking year round, usually go with caramel swirl. But it's the summertime. They have butter pecan back. It's, you can't order it in like Christmas time, what have you, or if you get like the fall, you have to go with the pumpkin flavored iced coffee, right? But now that it is year round butter pecan, I think I have to stick with it. I think I can go back to caramel now. If butter pecan's around all year, you got to go for it. So I'm glad we cleared up this very important question at this point of the Bruins off season. And again, that's it for today's episode of Poke the Bear, episode 152. Again, ideally next week we'll have a lot more tangible stuff to talk about. We'll have Evan back after his little trek down to Barnstable. So he'll be back. We'll hopefully have some actual stuff to talk about, whether it's the draft, free agency, trades, cap room, all that stuff. So again, thank you guys for listening. Again, this was episode 152 of Poke the Bear, presented by our great sponsor, FanDuel. Again, check out FanDuel.com. And again, thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you guys next week.